Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, to the next episode of the Road to FIDE Master series. This is the first episode of the open tournament I've played in Spain, in the beautiful Alicante. I love both the country and the city, so I hoped for the tournament to be a great one. I went there during the Easter week, therefore as you can tell it's been a few days after the tournament, so my apologies for being late. But as soon as I got from the tournament as a player, I had to unpack my bag and then pack it again to go to the next tournament, this time as a coach. I am now coaching at the Polish Junior Championship, therefore only after my students played few games I have some time to record this, so I hope that you will appreciate the commitment anyway. And so yeah, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the analysis of the game number 1. In general, the tournament was so big that there were over 500 participants, out of which I got 160 starting number, meaning that there were 159 better players than myself on the starting list, and I hoped that if I travel to Spain for such a tournament, I will get the chance of playing against as many of them as possible. Did the plan work out? We'll see after the first video, I guess. So in the first round I got paired against a guy from Spain, over 50 years old, but he was an experienced player. From what I saw, he once was over 2100 on FIDE list, therefore I knew that he knows how to play. But to my surprise, when I chose the e4 move, he replied with Sicilian, which was maybe his usual weapon, but the variation that follows was not, because he played against me one of my favorite variations as black, which is the 4 knights Sicilian. And I'm not sure if you remember it, but I've already covered few games like that on my channel, both from black and white's perspective. Actually, the episodes number 1 and 27 are the ones that I am referring to, and in both of those I managed to win as white in a very sharp variation, which comes after knight d2 b5, which is a natural attempt of targeting those dark squares, and after bishop b4, which is the natural reply, there is the bishop f4 move. It's a niche move and objectively it's not leading to the advantage for white. However, practically speaking, against lower rated opponents, against older opponents, at least that's what I thought so, it should work very well. However, though, it seemed that my opponent is prepared very good, since he took on e4 as he is supposed to do. And you may say, okay, I already can deliver the fork to the king and then take the rook on a8. However, it would be a little bit too premature, since after queen f6 I am just hit on too many different squares. I am threatened to the bishop, to the knight, to the king actually, because there are some checkmates in here, and I'm nearly lost as white. Therefore, instead of taking the rook immediately, I have to play a move like queen f3, developing the queen to a square from which it protects all those weak points in my position, and also I attack the opponent's knight, therefore he has to protect it. So he plays d5, and only now I can deliver the check and take the rook. And you may say, okay, what's the point of this variation from black's perspective if you are playing without a rook? However, it's still the very known theory, because in exchange for that, black gains very big initiative in the center of the board by playing a move e5, kicking away my bishop from the desired position. I have to go back to d2 to help my king dealing with this very bad pin. Knight d4 is coming with the double attack to the queen and the pawn, and then the potential double attack to the king and the rook, therefore I have to go back. And now queen h4. So as you can tell, within the last 3 moves, black pieces got very active, and it's still the variation that both sides have to follow if they don't want to lose. However, after g3, queen f6, with an attempt of knight f3, I can take on e4, and after knight f3 I have a decision. And after the game I spoke to my opponent, and in his notes he only had king e2 move, after which there is no better way for black to continue this, because he's down a rook and the knight, therefore he has to go back with a check, and I go back and he goes back, and it's a perpetual. Therefore my opponent was kind of surprised that I, as a much higher rated opponent, went for this line. However, what he did not know was that instead of playing king e2 and repeating the position, I can actually sack my queen on f3 for the knight, because I already took the rook. Now I'm taking the knight, and not only that, I will be taking the bishop with a check. So as you can tell, pretty crazy line so far, and it might get even crazier later on. And the point is that I was very well prepared and my opponent was not. And to my big surprise, and I have to really say that I respect what my opponent did in this game, he played out the variation perfectly. Because in here he's supposed to take the rook, he did it. I now castle with an attempt to make my king safer, protect the bishop on f1, develop the rook, still hit the bishop on c8, because if I wanted to do it immediately, there is the queen e4 check, making use of this king and this bishop. And now he's supposed to take on, play bishop e6 to go away from the knight, and he did that. Now he's supposed to take on h2, which he did. Now he's supposed to exchange on d5, and he did that. So he is following basically the only line for black to survive, and he was doing it until the very end of the line, which I know, until this point. And I'm not sure if you follow the thermometer on the left hand side of the board, but it did not move in the last 15 moves, because it was all more or less forced, very equal by the computer meaning, even though human wise it was so unreal to find it. So the funny thing is that in here I was not happy with the position and situation, even though I had half an hour clock advantage, guys, because in here I knew every move until that point. I had an hour and 30 minutes that I begin the game with still on my clock, and my opponent was down to one single minute, because he spent so much time figuring out how he is supposed to play after my queen sack. So it was a pretty amazing from him, as I've said, to find all of this. And the problem now arises that even though I have all this time, and you may say, okay, now is the time to use the time and win the game, I cannot outcalculate my opponent, I cannot outsmart my opponent, because the position is very straightforward. He will be willing to push the kingside pawns in order to make one of my light piece to sacrifice itself, so that neither of the pawns will promote, and I will be playing without an exchange shortly, therefore position might be very drawish. Not only that, at this point, finally on the move number 24, my opponent played the move h5, which was not in my notes. Therefore, I felt, okay, finally at the very last moment, my opponent played a bad move, because in my notes I had only b6 as an attempt to take care of the pawn first, and only then start pushing and creating the passer. However, to my surprise after the game, my notes were wrong. h5 is actually the main move in here, the main line in here. So I played the game after this move with a feeling that I should be better if not winning, but in reality opponent was playing still the very best moves, so that's not a pleasant surprise. And if my notes were saying that b6 is a must, then after h5 I was very happy to take the pawn on b7. My opponent continued with g5, as I've mentioned, and the point is that my knight is so far away from the king side in general that it's really not that great to try to jump there from the queen side to king side. So instead of doing that, I need to create my own counterplay on the other side of the board. So when opponent pushes on the king side, I want to do so on the queen side. So I pushed c4, he pushed h4, I took, he took, I played c5, he played h3. Obviously now the threat of the promotion is very, very big, so I need to sacrifice my bishop on g3 and then h2. And this is the position that was once more or less forced. Already 30 moves went by. I still did not use too many of minutes for my thinking, and opponent is very, very, very low on time. However, he still manages to find the only moves, because after c6 it's not that easy to find the saving solution, saving variation, and he did just that. The problem for him is that I am willing to push the pawn even further, and the king is outside of the pawn square. So the only way for opponent to survive this is to catch the pawn with the rook, and there are not so many ways of doing that, because many of the entry squares on the c file are taken or might be taken in the near future by my pieces. So the only way to survive this is to attack the pawn from h6, which obviously my opponent found, so that after c7, if I want to continue pushing, there is rook c6 with a check and my pawn is lost. For that reason, in order to protect the pawn, I need to move my knight, and I need to do it to the d8 square, so that my knight is a safe piece in here, because if my opponent wants to deliver the double attack to the pawn and to the knight at the same time, I push c7, and there is a very great symbiosis between my pieces, because the pawn protects the knight and the knight protects the pawn, in a sense that he protects the square from which the pawn might be attacked, and therefore there is no rook c6, no rook d8, and I will promote very shortly and win the game. For that reason, after knight d8, the only way for black now to survive, although maybe not the only one, but the most obvious one, is to play rook h5. Why? Because if my knight at first blocked the c5 entry point for the rook on the c file, and now is blocking the c6 one, rook h5 is a natural way of playing, because now rook wants to go there. And I didn't know that during the game, but apparently the best I can do is basically to repeat the moves, which is knight b7, rook h6, and claim that, alright, you as my opponent deserved to draw because you've played it out perfectly. And that should be the case. However, I still was playing with the thinking, with the thought behind my head that I should be somehow winning this, because h5 did not exist in my notes. So that's what you can get if you are preparing too deeply and you are still wrong about your preparation. For those reasons, since the knight takes care of the square, I wanted for that to stay like that. So if I need to take care of this square, I will do so by playing b4, and as you will see, the evaluation drops completely. Now I am lost. That's the case. Why? Because if this is the entry point that is taken away, and this, this is the perfect one for the rook, and opponent goes to h4. Not only that, not only he is threatening me with this check, but also my pawn is kind of hanging, and I need to decide what to do, and I really couldn't figure things out, because the king has too many squares to protect the pawn. The pawn might be protected by the other one, but it seems just too slow. My opponent can, for example, even play rook d4, hitting the knight. If my knight jumps away, then play rook c4 and take my pawn, I am losing quite easily. So a3 was non-playable for sure. The only moves I was considering was the b5 move, and I believe some king pushes. I had an idea in mind of playing king b2, rook takes b4, king a3, I believe, something like that, so that I am hitting the rook, and if it goes away wrongly, like to rook b6, I now have the c7 move or something like it. But the problem is that obviously opponent can play here, stop the c7 move from happening. After king b3, he can go there. After king b2, he can go there. My king is just too slow to deal with the rook when the rook has so many squares on this file. So king b2 is not working either. So by the method of the elimination, I thought, okay, b5 has to be played. Not only I am protecting my pawn in that manner, but also I am helping the c pawn in a sense. And also in here, after rook c4 check, which might have been played, if I go to the d file, once more I am getting under the rook d4 double attack, so I need to go to b2. And now the point was that if rook b4 happens, instead of going to a3, which once again will not work because the rook will catch my pawn, I can go to c3. This was my initial idea. If rook takes, I can go even higher up the board and try to help my pawn with my king, but it seemed already kind of wrong. Opponent might even perhaps have some ideas of playing with the rook there, taking the pawn, and then giving up the rook for a draw, and I still wanted to win. For those reasons, I was unhappy with the situation, but I kind of knew that maybe I misplayed it a little bit, but this would be my best chance to continue, and that was my idea. However, in the game, my opponent played an amazing move, king f8. So he is not revealing his ideas. I don't know if he wants to play rook b4 straight away to take my pawn, or give a check in between for some reason, but he's playing with his king, so that the king will be shortly in the pawn's square, because if I now push c7, then the rook c4 move is coming, and if I don't push it, king will go to e7 and will land in the pawn's square. And after king f8, I realized that I misplayed the position so badly that I'm not even winning anymore, but I might be actually losing. And this was the realization that a chess player never wants to have, but this was it. So not only I was trying to win, now I should be switching my thinking completely and try not to lose. So I don't have many choices though, so I just tried to activate my pieces, and I did that by playing king c2, and then after king e7, knight b7, I felt like, okay, at least my pawn with the knight creates a shield from the black's king, therefore I should be kind of okay with the follow-up of, I don't know, advancing the king, pushing the pawn. Maybe I can somehow make my position a little bit better, but after f5, once more I am kind of out of moves. Because if my king wants to help those pawns, this pawn might just get away and promote. If I want to catch this pawn, the rook might try to take those pawns because my king no longer protects them. If I go to c3, it's like the move in between, but does it help me in any basically scenario? I doubted that too. So my knight cannot move, my pawns cannot move, my king, I don't know where to move it. I am really struggling. In the end, I've decided that king d3 might be the best option for me to fight for a draw, because I thought that this is the biggest problem for me, and with that I might be dealing with that just fine. My opponent though played rook a4, after which I still cannot go up with the king. My pawn is lost, I cannot move it either, so for those reasons I was kind of hopeless. I tried to play knight c5 so that after rook a2 I have c7, and for a second I was thinking I'm winning. However, my opponent not only played rook a4 in here precisely, but then also found very precise move of rook a3 check. Why does it change anything? Because as of now, rook was under the attack, so it's obvious for the opponent that he has to move it. If he would be greedy and take the pawn, once more I am creating the shield, I will promote. However, if my opponent gives me a check and I go away from it, now is the time for him to play with the king towards the c-pawn, so I can no longer go with it and promote it, and this pawn is still not to be protected. I cannot do it in any way. So not only I am losing this pawn, but also I am correcting the black king's positioning, and like for what? For basically nothing. All I can get from it is basically the idea of trying to place the king here, but also I didn't like this move at all, because opponent can abandon the idea of taking on a2, and I didn't like such move in the game. Oh no, sorry, not yet. Not yet. This, and only after king f5, not here, but rook b2. Yeah, I blundered. I would blunder the rook here. Nevertheless, the idea is that since that's not working that great for me, I decided to play knight c5. First of all, with the hope that my opponent will be tired and will just try to repeat and claim a draw against a higher rated opponent, but obviously that didn't happen. And if opponent plays what he played, which is rook takes a2, I might have some possibilities of trying to play king d5 and then giving a check, and then maybe still pushing for, at that point I don't even know what. And in here after king e5, which would be logical as an attempt to try to take the pawn, this is I believe the moment in which I didn't like rook a5, but I'm not sure. Yeah, computer says it's working. So because my king went away from the knight and the pawn, I would be unable to protect those, and I would be losing with king d5. If such move happens, I might be able to give a check, then play king c5, and maybe create something out of thin air, let's say. After king d5 though, my opponent played rook c2, after which I gave a check, I went to the pawn, and I just was hopeless because I knew that I will be losing both pawns. In here this was the last attempt of mine trying to protect the pawns and take the pawn on f5 at the same time, but after rook b4 I cannot do everything at once. I need to make a move. If I go here I lose the knight, if I move the knight I lose the pawn, if I go here I no longer attack this one, so there is no good choice for me. So in the end I've decided that I want to take with the knight, so that after rook b5 king e4 I might have a shot at making my pieces move towards the a pawn and somehow make the game a little bit longer. After rook c7, rook c5, knight e7, a5, I still struggle with it because the rook creates an amazing shield against my king. And in here I kind of got the idea of what to do, but I just played it in the wrong move order, because I believe that the best try for me would be to play king d4 first, and then only after the pawn pushes I can try to play a move like this. If the king takes, I can now take the rook, and after a3 I give this check and I will get the pawn, so I will be able to save the game. And if the rook takes, then I can fork with basically the very same scenario, thanks to the fact that my king in this variation would be in the square of the pawn. However, in the game I felt like in here some move might happen, and I gave it like 2 seconds of thought because I was struggling to keep my focus anyway, because I was so sad about losing such a game, that I played c5 immediately, after which I just forgot that he can take with the king and claim the pawn for free without any problems. Thankfully though, I've played it so fast that after king d4 my opponent also did not hesitate and played a move very fast, and it was rook c1. However though, obviously the best move for him would be king b6, going back and basically getting the position as in here, but without the c-pawn, right? My c-pawn. So it would be much better for him, because after rook c1 I have one last chance. I can give a check and I can go to c3, blocking the black king from entering the position, and my king will be able to go just to the queen side. So I achieved that. After rook h1, king c4, check, king b3, we got such position. And as you can tell, it's obviously losing. However, after it was, I believe, already 4 hours of play, with being so little on time, apparently such position is not that easy to win for black, because how he is going to progress. And so I was just standing there, I was giving some checks, I was going back, and my opponent was playing it out not so precisely. He was lacking the idea of how to continue. Not only that, I was teasing him with some tricks, because after rook c5 I played knight c3, inviting him to take my knight and stalemate me in a funny way. Obviously he didn't do it, but the point is that I have some tricks up my sleeve and he does not. So I believe that after king b6, king b3, finally he went away once more with the rook, because this check and this whole maneuver did not work out for him that well. I believe that at this point he should have tried once more rook h4, and then after I would play a move like this. Now it would be the time to give me a check, and maybe now he would be able to enter the position in that way, in that scenario, because thanks to that this rook is placed in here, still blocking my king, and his king kind of would go up the board, and then he might be willing to out-tempo my knight, I guess, if that's the word in English that I can use, and then push somehow the pawn forward. Apparently though, in the game he was out of patience, he didn't know how to help the king with his rook, so he decided that okay, I will move the king straight away, and he went for king c5, which still is not that bad, because after king a4 that I chose, he can just simply go back and protect the pawn. But he went for it, he went up, and as you can tell from the evaluation, his advantage in here on the low depth is 73 points, so like over 8 queens, right? Am I doing the math correctly? Hopefully. And after this move that he played, it's dropping significantly, and after this move it's equal. It's equal, guys. From the human standpoint, in here already it's quite tough for black to win this game, because after knight to b1 he would have to find a way to punish my pieces for being on the side of the board nearly on the edge of it, because after rook h8 I cannot take the pawn still, because there is a check here and here. And if that's the case, after rook h8 I cannot play with my king, and I can do it with the knight, but after knight a3 he can play king c5, this time not threatening with the pin but rather the checkmate. And if that's the case, Later on he can go back with the king, protect the pawn, and then once again start again. However, as you can tell, when he went up with the king, he then went up with the rook, and I took the pawn. After his check, I went away, I went back to help my knight not being lost, and after a few more moves, I got my king out, and I lost, and I drew the game. Sorry, I didn't lose. I drew it. I drew it. Amazing stuff. I wanted this analysis to be very short because I want to show you guys also the second game of the tournament. However, as you can tell, it was quite a long one, quite an eventful one. I even said that what I did in this game because in my mind I lost, even though the result on the score sheet is a draw. So yeah, what can I tell you guys? Such games might happen, and I've learned my lesson, and you will know why and how in the next video, in which the variation that my opponent chooses is the very same one, but my reaction is completely different, because I am not willing anymore to play this bishop f4 line. It's too forced, it's too drawish, and if opponent knows it, or if opponent figures it out in the game, as in this one, I cannot do much. I even over push it, and I just save the game only by the miracle. And if that's the scenario, I don't want to have it anymore in my games. So yeah, quite a fast start to the game, to the tournament overall. And as I've said in the intro, in order to fight against one of those 159 higher rated players, I would have to win my games. I didn't do it in the first one, and we'll see if I will manage to do it in the second one, because as I've said guys, I want to show you both of those. So I will change the graphics real fast and we can go straight into it. In the second game I was playing against a younger guy, so I decided to play more of a strategical game against him, but with some aggressive point in the game. So he played d4, therefore I decided that I would like to enter the King's Indian type of structure in which there are plenty of imbalances, during which I can try to outplay my opponent. So I opted for knight f6, but after c4, instead of going for g6 straight away, I chose quite a strange move order of d6, and only after knight c3 was played g6, and after e4, then after bishop g7 we would enter the King's Indian defense, a normal version, but I went with e5 move. Such a move was in the notes of one of my coaches, and I would not recommend it without further, let's say, thinking about it. My point was that what's tempting usually for the younger guys is to take and disrupt my castling rights and say, okay, what is better? It's not that easy though. In here, obviously, black's position seems kind of strange, like this move is played and also this one, so those are the weak squares, but also this is the weak diagonal. Plenty of problems on the first sight and glance. Nevertheless, later on, if you know what to do, you can play it out normally and perfectly as black. Nevertheless, that's what I hoped for, kind of, but I also knew that my opponent might try to block the center, and if that's the case too, I kind of omitted plenty of the King's Indian variations that might be unpleasant for black at this point. For example, Samish is one that I don't like, or some others that might be rising in popularity nowadays. So by doing that, not only I changed the dynamic of the position, changed the move order there for the comfort zone of my opponent, but I didn't stop there, guys. I played knight b7, which is actually logical, trying to get to the square with the knight, but before I did it, at this point, I played a novelty, a very strange one, and it is h5. This is the move that was highlighted in the notes, and the variation ended there. So I wanted to give it a try. I'm not sure how to continue from here. The time from preparation was not so long because there were plenty of double runs. This is one of them. So I just felt, okay, let's have some fun, kick away the opponent from the comfort zone and play a move h5. It's alpha zero kind of type of move, I would say, and it has some merit to it. What is it? I would like to gain some space on the king side. I would be willing to push even further if I'm allowed to. And funny enough, usually in the King's Indian, you want to keep this bishop and then later on give him some space to play. But in this specific variation, the idea is to play bishop h6 and actually get rid of this bishop. so I would not be struggling strategically when it comes down to opening it up later on. So after knight g to e2 that was chosen by my opponent, which was already not in my notes, I chose h4, taking away the g3 square from him, and after f3 I now played knight h5. This is the usual attempt in those structures, so I felt that as of now, until that point, I am playing just alright, and I was waiting for this bishop to move for my bishop h6 moves. So whenever this move happened, now I chose to play there because at least I got one additional tempo that my opponent lost on developing the bishop first and then taking me in the next move. What I've missed though is that king e2 goes with a tempo to my rook, and I have a very responsible decision as of now, since I either have to go back with the rook, so I kind of am losing the tempo that I have just gained by making this white bishop move twice, or I can push g4, g5, but with pushing g5 I am getting rid of the f5 possibilities later on. So as I've said, it's a responsible decision, but in the end I decided to go for it anyway because I kind of expected what my opponent might play, even though it's not objectively the move that is the strongest. It's not the move that I consider the strongest, even though it was a different one than the computer suggests. And the third reason was I felt it might happen because my opponent kind of had the hand above the pawn in the past moves a little bit earlier, so he was strongly considering it, but the circumstances perhaps were not so great for him, but he now went for it. And the move I'm referring to is g4. Why is it not a good move? Because he underestimated my idea of planting the knight on f4 and allowing the exchange on this square. Because the whole idea of the g4 is, whenever I take and my opponent takes, now my opponent kind of gets the advantage of my unusual setup. My rook is misplaced, there is no bishop to protect it, there is the pin, so I might be exploited in plenty of different ways, and it's not that easy for black to continue this position. I knew that I would have to play king f6 in order to protect all of this, but it's debatable whether or not I'm already worse. Perhaps I am. So for that reason g3 was the more unpleasant move, because it kind of aims at the very same stuff, but it still controls the g4 f4 square. After g4 I'm happy to plant my knight there, because when my opponent exchanges I can take with the e pawn. And even so, even though it may seem counterintuitive because I am like taking away the pawn from the center, the whole idea behind it is that now I freed up the additional square for my knight to jump to, and it will be an amazing knight, the best piece in the position. So that was my idea, and I believe that my opponent reacted rather alright, because he went for knight b5, trying to make use of this square for his knight, because if my pawn went away, now it's a free square for him, right? I just thought that it might not be the best move order for him. He maybe could have waited with that a little bit, because now I will be getting some tempos on this knight. This is the first one, I am attacking it. This is the second one, I am attacking it. And after bishop e2, knight e5, I am just on time to cover the f5 square, so knight f5 is not a possibility. So this knight stands in the center and seems fine. However, there are no entry points for him, in contrary to my knights, because okay, I also don't have any entry points, but at least I have something exactly to look at, to have an eyes on, right? There are two weaknesses that I might have in mind. And for that reason, and also the reason that white has to make a move somehow in here, and he chose rook c1, I am now able to push c5, kick away the knight from this great position, and after bishop d7 I consider this position as a better one for me, because I am having better knight, little bit better bishop, and the only problem in that situation for me is that actually the position is rather closed, and I need to find a way to break through the opponent's camp. So what was my idea? I defined that this piece is alright, prepared for the breaks on the queen side. This is not the best piece of all, so I wanted to play king e7, rook h8, rook b8, and my opponent cannot prevent it, so he opted for his idea of making his position better. So he played h3, I pushed the king, he castled, I played with the rook, and now very good idea from my opponent, rook c3, because after rook b8 there is knight c1, And this maneuver of white accomplishes two things. First of all, rook is going to the third rank, asking my queen a questions, where do I want to go with it. Second of all, knight, which was misplaced in here, is going to the d3 square from the c1, and he will be willing to exchange my knight. So, if that's the case, I found a very funny looking line, which I was not sure if it's the best objectively, but it was so funny that I had to play it, which was queen d8, and after knight d3, queen h8. So basically my rook and the queen kind of swap the positions. The idea is simple. Whenever my opponent takes on e5, I want to recapture with the queen so that I can still have access to those dark squares, because the easier way to go about it would be to try to play f6. If my opponent take f to e5, so make my pawn structure better, and then hope for something on the queen side. And this was objectively perhaps a little bit better. I was just a little bit slightly worried that if my opponent somehow manages to maneuver the pieces in a way that I will not be able to break through effectively, it is a dead draw, because if I won't do anything on the queen side, I don't have king side or the center to do anything, and this I felt might leave my options open. However, it would require a very good overall play from my perspective, and I didn't do it. I did not play precisely, and my opponent did. How? Let's see. He started with rook b3, stopping the b5 move that I was willing to play and I would love to play. And now I have a critical moment for me, because I need to decide whether I want to push a6 and b5, or a5, or b6, a6, b5. Because the whole problem of mine is that whenever I push the a pawn, I am allowing the white rook to the b6 square, and overall, if I push the a pawn, I might struggle to then pushing the b pawn. So maybe I can just try to push the pawn like this, gain the control, gain the space, kick away the rook somehow, and maybe later on I will be able to push b5. Or if I am so worried about, let's say, rook b6 move, I can try to play like this, and then this, and then this. Or I can say, okay, I will manage, and I can play like this and still go for the b5 move. So I was debating what to do, and in the end I believe I chose the worst line of all, because apparently what computers suggest is that I should play a5, which is very counterintuitive from the human standpoint. Not only that, after rook b6 he's proposing rook a6 as an only attempt to claim the advantage, because after takes, the point is that my pawns, there are two of them, and after b3 I can play once with a4, then exchange, and if I need to I will go with the second pawn to open up the b file. But I guess that just a4 with one pawn would be enough to create a b3 weakness. Nevertheless, it was unhuman to play like that, and even though I saw such variation, I felt like I might have something better. And this better idea, at least I thought so, was to say, okay, I will just play a6, b5, I don't care about rook b6 being a possibility. And so this was the problem, because rook b6 is a good move, and I just simply didn't want to play the other way around, which I was considering, which is b6, because I was worried that after rook a1, a6, white is just on time to play a4, and I will not be ever able to push b5 anymore, and the computer agrees, it's 0.00. So b6 was too slow, a5 was unhuman, so I went for the human way of playing, and then I've blundered, because after rook b6 I have a problem with this rook, and already in order to not be worse I need to react quickly, because queen a5 might be coming, so both heavy pieces of the opponent might block my both pawns, which is not the dynamic that you usually see in the chess game, but it would be efficient in a sense that I would not be able to break through anywhere. Once more I would have to play a5, once more I would have to choose this unhuman move, and I didn't want to do it. Not only that, I played a6 with the idea behind it, right? So my idea was at this point that I will play a6 and I will follow it up with king d8, and I thought that it's an amazing move, because now after queen a5 I can give a check, and after king goes up I can go back, and my queen at least is active. First of all, I misevaluated the situation. Queen alone will not be able to do anything about it, anything in this position. Not only that, I completely missed my opponent's possibility, and such possibility is the move b4. And after that move, guys, as you can tell from the evaluation bar, white is much better, and not only much better, but practically speaking, even winning. My opponent caught me in the awkward situation position in which I was trying to really break through, and what I accomplished is basically I allowed white rook into the activity. I have a king misplaced in the very center of the board, blocking my both rooks and not protecting d6 pawn. Like everything that can be wrong about this position in this exact moment is wrong, and I am out of moves basically. Computer is saying that I am only -1 from my standpoint if I will start giving away the pawns and play a move like this, after which I lose the b pawn and I allow the rook to the 7th rank. Like, how can you play such move? You can't, right? And if you can't, your position will get even worse, because I took on b4, I invited the queen to b4, this pawn is attacked, and if I will attempt to protect it, not only some c5 ideas might be coming and disrupting my king's placement completely, but also some calm ideas like rook b1, tripling up the heavy pieces on the b5, taking the pawn, like all the possibilities in the world, and with each move the evaluation will grow and grow and grow. So with that in mind, I felt, okay, human-wise, I have nothing to look for in such scenario, so I need to play like an engine. I need to sacrifice and make the biggest mess I can in this position. So I gave a check, and I didn't stop there, because then I followed it up by queen e3, hitting the bishop. Opponent protected it, even though apparently he did not have to. He can just basically play the move like this, because after queen e2, here, 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 his position is so overwhelmingly great, better, amazing, that I will be losing shortly anyway, even with the bishop advantage. But yeah, he went for rook e1, which is once more a human way of playing, and I, unhuman wise, took on the g4. Why? Well, it is well, an attempt to draw the game. If my opponent is scared because he was kind of low on time and takes fg, I can then give a perpetual, going here and there all the time. And if he accepts the challenge, I might be able to swindle him, in a sense that I might still go for the perpetual, or sometimes checkmate, because after a3, which is the natural follow-up, and if he would accept the pawn, for example, now this is kind of the big threat, and opponent is not losing only because he is allowed to deliver the perpetual on the dark squares like that, and my king has nowhere to hide, so that is funny. However, though, he found the best move, which is king f1. Once more, I will admit, I didn't see it. My calculation in this game was very poor. Nevertheless, even if I saw it, I perhaps would go for this line, because it's the last attempt, at least I believe so. I believed so, and I believe so still. In here the problem is that even though my pawn looks like it's promoting, it's really not. Opponent now will go back with this king to the pawn, now will take it, and the difference is that instead of having the king on h3, he has the king on h1, and thanks to that fact he can try to defend on the light squares with bishop f1, so that whenever I take the pawn, he plays bishop f3, bishop g2, sorry, I am out of checks, out of moves, and then he starts taking me on d6, checking, checkmating, and finishing the game. In here, I had one last cheeky attempt, let's say, because I played king c8, very funny looking move. The idea behind it was rather simple. After queen d6, I can take the rook, and there are no checkmates there, funny enough, for white, I would say. At least that's what I've calculated. Queen d6 is the most obvious logical move that opponent would be willing to play, and if that's not possible, what else can he do? So I felt like this is a good try, but obviously he can take rook d6, and I am now hitting the queen, not entering there, still has to protect the rook, he has to decide what to do, and after queen c3, king c7 is the possibility, and all of a sudden I might be the one checkmating, right? But it's not working. As you can tell, Ivar bar is merciless. I have nothing to play for because after rook h6, which is apparently the only move, but obviously the only logical too, I have no possibilities. I have no checks, no checkmates, and any kind of moves like that. F6 was my last try because if the rook takes, I then get to checkmate opponent on the h file. If the queen takes, I might take the rook, but I will get checkmated within two moves nevertheless. But my opponent found yet another way to checkmate, which was rook h7, and after king b6, c5. Obviously I can take, but then rook b1, and I will be losing the queen in the game. So I allowed the opponent to checkmate me. He deserved that. He played not a bad game, not the greatest either, but I allowed him to do what he did as of now, as you can see on the board. So yeah, not only did I not win the first game, but also I did not win the second one, and out of both of those I got only half a point. So when you consider what is a bad start to the tournament, this is exactly that. My confidence was so low at this point. I wanted to forfeit some of the next day games, but my coach did not allow me to, and I'm thankful for it. And yeah, I was at my peak rating, and I had to crawl back from minus 25 points at this stage of the tournament after only two games. It is not the best the best scenario, and not only that, it's not about the FIDE rating in the end, it's about playing good chess, and I was missing so much. I was playing not so great that I didn't feel the confidence I needed to bounce back. But as I've said, my coach fueled a little bit in me, and will it be enough for the rest of the tournament? You will find out in the future episodes tomorrow and the day after and after and after and after. So stay up for those, and if you want to cheer me up after those two games, please remember to leave a like, and if you are willing to see what happened in the future, please subscribe to not miss out any more analysis and recaps. And with that, I will leave you here. I wanted this recap to be rather short, to not relieve my losses too long, but as you can tell, it's pretty long one. So if you managed to stay until this point, I'm very thankful. Thank you very much, and we'll see each other tomorrow for the hopefully better video, more happy, hopeful, and all that. So see you, thank you, and bye bye.